come to a point we agree together. We cannot bear any much more. We won't have any more patience, but we will resist more and more and more, and we will be more resilient more and more until we will achieve victory and liberation, and until we achieve the end of occupation for all of our occupied lands, and on the top of them, Jerusalem.
Latest news, Israel. Headliner: tensions flare as Israeli police enter Al-Aqsa Mosque again. Dated April 17, 2022. Israeli police have entered the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound as worshippers gathered for early morning prayers 2 days after detaining hundreds at the site in another raid at the mosque. Israeli authorities said they entered the compound on Sunday to facilitate routine visits by far-right Jews to the holy site, and that Palestinians had stockpiled stones and set up barriers in the compound. The police cleared Palestinians out by the sprawling esplanade outside the mosque, while dozens remained inside. Palestinian medical workers said at least 19 people were injured. 3 people were transferred to the hospital after being beaten or hit by rubber-coated bullets, according to the Palestinian Red Cross. The organization said it was prevented from accessing the compound, but managed to assist the injured near Bab al-Asbat. 9 people were arrested, police said, after Palestinians smashed the windows of 2 buses carrying Jewish visitors to the site, lightly injuring several of them. Al Jazeera's Natasha Gonem, reporting from occupied East Jerusalem, said the raid took place ahead of a 3-hour time frame during which non-Muslims are allowed to visit the compound, the third holiest site in Islam and the holiest for Jews, who referred to it as the Temple Mount. Tensions had been high after the far-right Jewish group returned to Temple Mount offered a cash prize to anyone who went into Al-Aqsa Mosque and sacrificed a goat, a Jewish religious ritual that is prohibited inside the mosque and that would constitute a further provocation. This didn't happen, but it went viral on social media, Gonem said, adding that it contributed to a rise in tensions. The Palestinian Authority on Sunday laid the blame on Israel for the consequences of the current tension at Al-Aqsa. We call on the U.S. administration to break its silence and stop this aggression that will inflame the entire region, Authority spokesman Nabil Al-Muwudinea said in a statement carried by state news agency Wafa. The Palestinian Foreign Ministry also condemned the Israeli escalation at the Flashpoint site. A ministry statement said the Israeli escalation flouted on Arab and Islamic backlash and was a continuation of Israeli plans to Judaize Al-Aqsa Mosque. The head of Hamas warned Israel that Al-Aqsa is ours and ours alone. Our people have the right to access this and pray in it, and we will not bow down to Israeli repression and terror, Ismail Haniyeh said in a statement. Meanwhile, Pope Francis on Sunday called for free access to the holy sites in Jerusalem as he delivered his annual Easter address, which this year coincided with the Muslim holy month of Ramadan and the Jewish festival of Passover. Pope Francis went on to say that may Israelis, Palestinians, and all who dwell in the holy city together with the pilgrims experience the beauty of peace, dwell in fraternity, and enjoy free access to the holy places in mutual respect for the rights of each. Marwan Bishara, Al Jazeera's senior political analyst, said the raids by Israeli forces into the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, also known as the Noble Sanctuary, is due to Israel's colonial machinations. It clearly has a goal in mind, and that is denying the Palestinians any sense of sovereignty over their most sacred site, which is the Noble Sanctuary. In the face of total control by Palestinian life by the Israeli occupation, the Palestinians regard the compound as their last stand, Bishara continued. Everything has been taken away from them, the land, the olive groves, their homes, their dignity. Israel took control over everything that is Palestine, from the river to the sea, with the exemption of the Noble Sanctuary. Palestinians continue to think that at least they can have the symbol of Palestinian sovereignty in the old city of Jerusalem. More than 300 Palestinians were detained on Friday in Al-Aqsa in what rights watchdogs say was the largest en masse arrest over the course of 1 hour and in one location in more than 20 years. At least 158 Palestinians were injured in the ensuing violence. Videos circulating online Friday showed police firing tear gas and stun grenades and even hitting children with batons, while the Palestinians were throwing stones back in return. Headliner: Tehran warns Israel on making tiniest move against Iran. Associated Press, dated April 18th, 2022. Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi Monday warned that Israel will be targeted by his country's armed forces if it makes the tiniest move against Iran. He spoke as talks stalled in Vienna over a deal to rein in Iran's nuclear capabilities, which Tehran says are used for peaceful purposes. Israel opposes a deal, saying it does not do enough to curb Iran's nuclear program or its military activities across the region. Israeli officials have said they will unilaterally do what's necessary to protect their country. Raisi addressed Israel directly during a speech at an annual parade of Iran's armed forces. Raisi added, "If the tiniest move by you happens against nation of Iran, center of the Zionist regime will be destination of our armed forces." Raisi did not elaborate, but said Iran watches any move by Israel closely. Iran has not recognized Israel since the 1979 Islamic Revolution that ousted the pro-West monarchy and brought Islamists to power. It supports anti-Israeli militant groups such as Hamas and Hezbollah. Raisi said that Iran's military power is a deterrent. He said army managed to improve its capabilities despite years of sanctions on the country over Tehran's nuclear program. Monday's parade showcased jet fighters, helicopters, drones, and air defense systems, as well as military tanks, missiles, and naval vessels. Israel in recent years improved relations with neighboring Arab nations in the Persian Gulf, which has angered Iran's leaders. Tehran also has blamed Israel for the sabotage of its nuclear sites and the assassinations of its nuclear scientists. U.S. intelligence agencies and the IAEA believe Iran had an organized military nuclear program until 2003. Iran insists its nuclear program is aimed at generating power and for medical purposes. That's the latest news, and now my thoughts. The latest clash, or the latest assault, if I could use the word correctly, on the Palestinians in the holy month of Ramadan this weekend has shown that there is no effort in creating any type of peace or having anywhere near peace talks. It seems that the IDF is willing to use their weapons as a negotiation to peace, which we know that violence only begets violence. The timeline for this aggression can be dated back to May 13th, 1948, when the Haganah, which was the main Zionist paramilitary organization, which was established in 1948, and it became the core of the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, took control of Jaffa, which is the oldest part of Tel Aviv, and saw the population of 70,000 people reduced to 4,000. In which on May 14th, the next day at midnight, the British mandate over Palestine had terminated. In return, we saw the Jewish People's Council gathered at the Tel Aviv Museum and approve of a proclamation declaring the establishment of a Jewish state to be known as the State of Israel. And since then, we have had which now amounts to 74 years of a country that was born from the United States and Great Britain, which also helped facilitate the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia just 10 years prior, for the sole purpose of demeaning and depopulating the Arabs or the Muslim community in whole. But an escalation in the violence can be seen back in May of last year, in which in just the month of May, we saw 16 attacks. Now, this comes from the May 5th, 2021 negotiation to form a new Israeli government under Benjamin Netanyahu, which failed, in which we saw Yair Lapid of the centrist Yesh Atid party, who was asked by President Reuven Rivlin to try and form a new government, in which we saw the next day in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, where Palestinians were killed in clashes with the Israeli Defense Forces, which led to a large number of police deployed on the Temple Mount, around 70,000 worshipers, which attended the final Friday prayers of Ramadan, in which the IDF forces instigated a conflict that saw some rocks being thrown, in which a retaliation, an overt retaliation of rubber bullets, batons, and outright assaults on women, children, and young men at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Fast forward 12 months later, and we still have this act of aggression by a military power, which is backed by the United States and coalition. And of course, like clockwork, the Western legacy media continues to denigrate the Palestinians and claim that they are the aggressors in this conflict. Well, there is no conflict. This is an outright one-sided assault on a community which has no means of actually defending itself without using these Salafist organizations like Palestinian Jihad and Hamas. And of course, when we talk about the Gaza Strip, Hezbollah. The problem for the Palestinians is the silence of the Arab Republic. This is nothing new, because the Arabs in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf continue to talk a game, but they're all talk and no action, because these are Western puppets. King Salman of Saudi Arabia can raise the issue all he wants, and his son, the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, continues to ignore the pleas of the Palestinians. Syria can't do anything because they're still battling to take control of the country. Lebanon is trying to do everything in their power, even though they are separated. And of course, Iran, under a malicious assault from the United States and NATO, United States and the United Nations, regarding these harsh economic sanctions, which really is an act of war, because it affects not the rich, but the public. Now, I could sit here and tell you that Israel is the cause of all evils. That's for anti-Semites. I try to balance fair reporting to you, the public. There are problems in the Arab world. I mention this almost every day. But the crimes of Israel cannot be ignored. And it's been going on for far too long. They're not interested in peace, because without peace, there is always war. And without war, there is no need for the military during peacetime. Israel has not seen peace since they have been a country that was created by Great Britain and the United States. The United States rarely has ever seen peace in their over 275 years of existence. The same could be said for Saudi Arabia, a country mired in corruption and turmoil, and a country which is unique in its own right, which was partly shaped by an anti-Islamic ideology that has created the majority of the terrorist groups that we see in the Arab world and Europe and Southeast Asia. Groups like Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, Abu Sayyaf, Jama Islamiyah, Egyptian Islamic Jihad, Gamma Islamiyah, and so on. The Muslim world continues to be a victim of these countries and their inability to negotiate rationally and with any integrity. The United States continues to give military aid to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which uses it to destroy the country of Yemen. And the United States continues to be influenced by the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, the Zionist Organization of America, and the dozens of other smaller Zionist organizations, knowing full well that the largest Zionist organization in the world, which are Evangelical America inside the United States, will continue to suppress any type of Arabic influence, denigrate them as terrorists, and continue to support the nationalist regime in Israel. But there are more people speaking out. There are more people trying to bring light to this disaster in Israel. And it is high time that we, the public, start speaking out for the very few in Palestine before we become the minority in this country under an oppressive, sociopathic, narcissistic government which supports the worst countries in the world when it comes to human rights and terrorism. And that is Saudi Arabia, the Gulf, and Israel. And I will not be bullied into silencing my condemnation of these governments. This is not a generalization. This is directed to the governments of these countries. And that is who are committing and facilitating these crimes. I would like more people to speak out and join me in protest.